Hello and welcome to another collection connection from Cyfarthfa Castle Museum and Art Gallery. My name is Christopher Parry and I work at Cyfarthfa Castle, and yeah, welcome back to another in our series where we look at objects from the collection and try to find the connections between local heritage, each other and history in general really. Today we're going to be focusing on objects in our collection from World War I, directly linked to people from Merthyr. Now this is part one of two parts of this collection connection. The first part is going to be focusing on World War I and the second is going to be focusing on World War II. So without even more preamble, we're going to get into it, and we've got quite a range of objects, and I'm going to start with the one that I know least about but I'm most intrigued about as well, and that is this. This is a piece of fabric that has a poem written on it, and I will read the poem out to you now. This piece of khaki is not tattered or torn, but cut from a coat a soldier has worn. It is not gilt-edged or highly framed card, but conveys my best wishes with kindest regards. At the top of the fabric it says European War 1914 to 1915, which gives you an indication of when this was written, because obviously the war went on quite a while longer than that. But when this was written, someone was being quite optimistic or quite factual at the time, saying this war has only been going on from 1914 to 1915. And at the bottom you see various symbols tied in with Welsh regiments and things like that. When this came into the collection during the World War I period, it was woefully underdocumented when it came in. So we have no idea who it came from, who wrote it, who it was sent back to, or anything. All we have is this fragment. You may have been looking at these when the video is on, and these are quite unique as well. What these are cut bits of steel engraved, and what the engraving says is they are shell steel, 18-pound high explosive, rolled at Dowlais in 1917, and they both are rolled at Dowlais in 1917. And these shell steel examples give a sign as to what Merthyr was doing locally during World War I. They were making the raw steel for shell casings and other raw materials as well. We have no idea how much shell steel actually was used from Merthyr. It's a difficult thing to ascertain and to pinpoint in any way, to be honest, because the specifications of the steel was changing so often. A lot of the time the workers in Dowlais would finish making a batch of steel, and then the government or the armed forces would change quite rapidly and quite immediately the type of steel they wanted, because they were experimenting as they went. And so if there were any deficiencies in the steel found on the battlefront, they would immediately change the mixture, if you will, of the steel and the composition of it. And so Dowlais was constantly reworking the steel, and for those reasons we have no idea how much Merthyr impacted massively on the war effort producing steel. Another really unique set of objects comes in a collection of different photographs really. This photographic collection belonged to a gentleman called William Stephen Williams, who lived on Oakfield Terrace down in Aberfan. Now, William had a massive collection of photos of his fellow soldiers. Take for example this gentleman here. This is signed Your Sincere Pal Dick. Now who Richard Thomas Arnold was a friend of William Stephen Williams, who served in the 1st Battalion Welsh Guard. He enlisted on December 30th, 1914 and was wounded in battle and hospitalised and sent home. And that is where this photograph would have been taken, because uniquely you can see his uniform is different from the standard troops, because he's wearing what was called hospital blues, a hospital uniform for troops. So this was him in hospital taking a photo and sending it back home to his pal. Sadly, amongst all of these photos, we haven't been able to identify any of William Stephen Williams himself. But the most unique part of these photos is the other photos that come in the collection, and they look at the regiment William was part of. William was part of the Royal Army Flying Corps, the RFC, or the RAF as it would later become known, and he was an engineer in the RAF, or RFC rather. He was a colliery engineer in Aberfan, and that was his day-to-day job, and so when he enlisted, they basically transferred his skills. And so the photo collection here shows experimental aircraft, shows aerial photography taken high above France and Belgium and other areas, shows all manner of different air-related images from World War One. Sadly, we know very little about William Stephen Williams' career and life after the army, but we do know that he served with the RFC right until the war ended and was promoted to sergeant on November the 1st, 1917, and he was stationed in France throughout the war as part of the 87th Squadron. He left the war effort in 1918 and returned back to Aberfan. One thing that we get a lot of as well, and which is a difficult thing to display a lot of the time, are letters. And one set of letters we got was from a gentleman called Ernest Remington Jones. Now, he was a clerk in the town hall in his day-to-day life, but enlisted as soon as war started and was part of the Royal Expeditionary Force, so the first wave of troops going out to battle on the fields of France and Belgium. He sent many letters back and forth, and these letters give an indication of who he is, what he does, and his thoughts and feelings while on the battlefront, really. Take this letter, for example, that was dated the 25th of March 1916. So the letter goes into general details about his day-to-day life, about how he's feeling, and asking them how they're feeling. He also tells them that he received a copy of the Merthyr Express and was intrigued by the yarns that he read in there and was keeping up to local knowledge. And he also was intrigued, he says, to read about the conscientious objectors that were really dominant in Merthyr during World War One. He even sends a postcard early on saying that he was promoted to a full bombardier and he was made paid sergeant. Not just straight letters though, we get Christmas cards as well, because he would serve many years, and on the Christmas cards reverse it would say active service and then give his love and his Christmas wishes to his family. We get these amazing postcards with the letter on active service and the address on Gwendoline Street of his parents, and yeah, these finely ornate Christmas cards. Among the Ernest Remington Jones collection is a fabulous collection of photographs as well of friends and himself and other serving troops, which document his time as part of the British Expeditionary Force early on in 1914 to 1917. We were given a kind of almost a complete story about Ernest, even to the point where we have a paper cutting of a photo of him and a paper cutting of his obituary, because in September 1917 he was killed, unfortunately, like many Merthyr men were killed. His commanding officer, writing to his parents, said no one could wish to have a better or smarter NCO and one keener about his work. And the collection even shows a picture of his gravestone in place, which is obviously sent back to his family because this gravestone would have been out on the battlefront in Belgium, and so they took photos of the gravestones and sent them back, and he died at the age of just 22 years old. Another letter from the museum collection is equally kind of tragic in many ways, and this letter comes from King George and it comes from Buckingham Palace. Now I'll read a bit of this letter and quickly tell you a bit about who the person this letter was directed at and officially sent to. So the letter begins saying, "The Queen joins me in welcoming you from your release from the miseries and hardships which you have endured with so much patience and courage." Now the letter was addressed to Private Henry Carvey, who lived in Toynrodden in Merthyr Tydfil. Henry was born in 1879 in Pontypool but came over to work in Merthyr as a miner, and in January 1980 he was enlisted to fight. As soon as Henry went out onto the battlefront, he was wounded in his very first theatre of war in 1918 and thought to be either dead or missing by his fellow troops. But what had actually happened is he was taken prisoner of war, and he was prisoner of war in a German prisoner of war camp. But this letter was sent from the King to basically all prisoners of war in Britain, just to explain to them how grateful the King and country was for their sacrifice, essentially. Sadly, not long after he received this letter, he was to pass away as well. And why he passed away is the mistreatment he suffered as a prisoner of war was so severe that when he came back he had several other ailments and medical difficulties from his injuries, and he didn't live to see the end of 1919, unfortunately. Many of you may have heard of the artist Sidney Colonel Vosper, famously painting the Salem painting, which people used to say had a devil in the shawl and all that type of thing. But what you may not know is that he wanted to do his bit during World War I, but for medical reasons couldn't be a troop on the front lines. And so not wanting to step back from doing his bit as he saw it, he made his way to France and actually served time at a hospital in France. These pictures in front of me form part of a really unique collection from Vosper, and they show what he was seeing out in France, what he was seeing in the hospital, what he was seeing on the streets, and all of that type of thing. Now Vosper married a Merthyr girl, and that's why a lot of his collection ended up in the Museum of Cyfarthfa. We've got little woodcut prints of soldiers going out to war. We've got a preliminary sketch that he made in the hospital in 1916, which then turned into a full sketch by Vosper that you can see here, and subtle differences between the two. But it's amazing how this artist kind of just saw this little snippet of life in the hospital and was inspired to create this piece of art. Not only that, he created artwork for programs for the Christmas festivities and concerts held at the hospitals, and so this is one from 1916 that he drew the front of. And outside of the hospital we get him drawing deserted streets that have been demolished by bombs and warfare, and some of these sketches eventually being turned into full watercolour paintings by Vosper, which just show the devastation of the streets around the hospital that he was serving in France. Now you may have noticed a lack of female representation throughout this collection, and it's very true that we lack masses of information on what happened to women during World War I, and particularly women from Merthyr, obviously. One of the stories that we've got from Merthyr is of this lady right here, and this lady is named Sarah Jane. Now Sarah Jane Lewis, as she was known, was a school teacher in Hilgerig. She was born in Georgetown in 1883, and as this photo here shows, she was a school teacher in Hilgerig Infants in 1914 when war broke out. Being prevented in many ways, like women were at the time, from doing a lot of different occupations, she still wanted to do her bit. So she became, quite early on, a VAD nurse, a voluntary aid detachment nurse. And in front of me here are a collection of medals that she was awarded for her time for being a dedicated nurse. So not only was she a school teacher full-time, she also then spent the rest of her time being an assistant in the General Hospital in Merthyr, helping troops in any way that she could, really. The last object I'll show to you is this amazing little model. Cast in solid silver, it was given as a present to a gentleman called Seymour Berry. Now why it was given to Seymour Berry is because he was instrumental in arranging one of the biggest fundraising events during World War I that took place in Merthyr. There's a plaque that goes with this, and I'll read parts of the plaque to you now so you best understand what the event was all about. So Henry Seymour Berry, Gweld Garth Merthyr, by his fellow townsmen in appreciation of the service he rendered to king and country in organising the second war loan campaign in this borough, and on that occasion with the visit of the tank Julienne when touring the county raising war funds, the amount subscribed within the borough during the first 3 days of the campaign was over £1 million. But this is a recreation of the tank that visited Merthyr, the Julienne tank. This was given to Seymour Berry for helping to raise over £1 million for the war effort in June 1918. It goes without saying that we've got many more objects in the museum collection connected to World War I, but obviously I haven't got time to show you them all. But hopefully you've enjoyed having a look at some of them with me today, and as ever, if you would like the video and share it as much as possible, that would be massively appreciated. Thank you very much for watching, and hwyr fawr.